done with the Sermon on the Mount. That seemed like it was forever, but we did finish it up, and we described the Sermon on the Mount as sort of a manifesto that Jesus was laying out there. And so we're moving on here in the ministry of Jesus, and as the narrative of his life sort of progresses, the Bible makes the claim that Jesus performed some miracles. And so that's kind of what we're going to do this morning, is talk about miracles. We're going to think about that a little bit, and we're just going to start by jumping into this story that starts in chapter 8 and see where it goes. So we're going to start with verses 1 through 4. It starts out with him coming down from the mountain that he gave the Sermon on the Mount on. And it says, when he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I'm willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately, he was cured of his leprosy. And so there's a part of this story that's kind of easy to miss or to not see right away. Jesus reached out his hand and touched this man. And so Matthew's deliberately spelling this out this way, where Jesus reaches out for the guy. And the word that he uses actually usually means to grasp or to cling. And it's like Jesus actually grabs this guy by the shoulder or something. And so this is a super remarkable event if you know anything about how lepers were viewed in the ancient world. And so there was this pervasive fear of leprosy. People would cross the street and stay away from people with leprosy. They would throw rocks at lepers to keep them away from them. They were scared to death of getting leprosy. And Jesus just grabs this guy. There's nothing weird at all about it. This is a pretty far out thing to happen. This guy was an outcast. He's a reject. He's way outside of society because of this disease that he had. And Jesus grasps him and he's instantly healed. And it sure looks like the claim is being made here that this is a miracle. All right, and so Wikipedia says that a miracle is an unexpected event attributed to divine intervention. That's pretty close, right? That sounds kind of right. But a miracle is also usually a direct suspension or even a violation of natural law. And so sometimes you hear people talking about things like the parting of the Red Sea, and they'll be saying things like, they've done some research and it turns out that the Bible's true. There was some seismic activity, at the time, and, that would have created a seismic seiche, which is a little bit like a tsunami, and it would have sucked the water out of that spot, and the Jews could have crossed right then at that moment, and then the water would have rushed back in and killed the Egyptians. All right, and so the Bible really is true after all, and it really is possible that this happened. And the problem with all that is that it actually means that the Bible's false. Okay, that's not what the Bible said. The Bible said that it was a miracle. It's not a natural event that they happened to be in the area for. And it says that the water was standing there like walls on either side. They walked through on dry land. All right, that's a miracle. And so I'm not really sure what the appeal is of making these miraculous events into natural events, but it is really clear that the Bible claims that these are not natural events. And so our question kind of this morning is all this mumbo jumbo, all right? Or is it not real? Okay, are miracles for real? And so, let's consider this position that miraculous things are just superstition. They're not true. These are all just old stories from a time when people used to believe stuff like this. So we're going to kind of spend some time looking at this from the position of a person who's a naturalist. All right, so this is a statement that is pulled out of a modern biology textbook, okay? And it says that Darwin knew that accepting his theory required believing in philosophical materialism, the conviction that matter is the stuff of all existence and that all mental and spiritual phenomenon are its byproducts. And from a strictly scientific point of view, rejecting biological evolution is no different from rejecting other natural phenomenon, such as electricity and gravity. Okay. Right? So look at this again. It says that philosophical materialism, the conviction that matter is the stuff of all existence and that all mental and spiritual phenomenon are its byproduct. So they're claiming that matter is somehow causing the mind or the spirit to exist. Is that what they're saying? Actually, no, they're not making that claim, because mental and spiritual phenomenon, they're talking about apparent mental and spiritual things. They're claiming that all mental and spiritual things are an illusion. And so if philosophical materialism is your bag, then matter and energy is all that there is. The mind doesn't really exist. So we went over that a few weeks ago. There's certainly no place for the reality of anything that's spiritual. All right, all that stuff is imaginary. It's an illusion. So these things are phenomenon that seem to be real, but are actually completely an illusion. In reality, there's just matter and energy. There's nothing else. And so from the point of view of philosophical materialism, it is so obvious that all this stuff is an illusion, that, matter and energy are all that exist, that denying this would be just like denying electricity or gravity. If we juxtapose these two statements here, then they're basically saying that anyone who refuses atheistic materialism is so ignorant that they would also deny gravity. It's that obvious, right? Like you how can you possibly come to any other conclusion is the way they're approaching this. And so I kind of wonder about that, right? Could that be true? I mean, it sounds to me like it's just rhetoric. Maybe it's possible that philosophical materialism is just as ignorant as it claims that other points of view are. And I personally think that this is exactly the kind of arrogance that has earned real modernism the contempt of just about every other philosophical worldview. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about postmodernism or a sort of religious worldview. There's a lot of contempt for genuine modernism. And, one of the first things that I would point out to begin to argue the opposing view here is that Darwin himself never said anything like this. Okay, so he didn't feel at all like accepting his views of natural selection meant that you were even coming close to subscribing to philosophical materialism. So he was completely ambiguous on the subject. But near his own death, he even said that he still could not believe that the universe was an accident. All right, it must have been called into place, is what he said. And so this thing that this textbook is saying here that Darwin knew is simply not true. Darwin didn't know this and didn't believe this. All right, so check this out. This came off of the website talkorigins.org. it's a pretty hardcore naturalistic evolution, anti-creation group of people. So you can count on these guys to not go soft in any way on what they believe. This list is the 11 central claims that were made by Darwin and that are made by Darwinism as it's put forward today. And so you can go ahead and read it if you want to, and you can, Google it if you want to, read through the list. But I am not a philosophical materialist, all right? I believe in all kinds of the supernatural. And you are probably not a philosophical materialist because you're sitting in a church on a Sunday morning. And as I read through each of these 11 positions, I agree with or would say that I believe that many of them are true. I even know plenty of thoughtful, God-fearing Christians that would say that they believe that every single one of these things is true. All right. And so even if that freaks you out a little bit, it is completely true that there is not one thing on this list that rules out the divine in addition to any or all of these things. And so a lot of this list can be shown to have occurred, but that in no way rules out God, unless, of course, you have a prior metaphysical commitment to philosophical materialism. And so in the exact same way that believing in God does not have to rule out the possibility of anything on this list being true, believing in some of the things on this list does not rule out believing in God. All right, they're not even close to being mutually exclusive. And yet somehow as a society, we have ended up in a place where we think that they are mutually exclusive. And so if we look at this statement here, it's not, in fact, Darwin that knew that you had to be a philosophical materialist to accept this theory. It was the authors of this textbook that have that point of view. And in fact, there are a great many Christians today that believe that a substantial portion of Darwin's science is sound. All right, and that doesn't take away one little bit from the fact that they believe in a creator God and his miraculous intervention in the universe, all right, and in the history of the world and in the history of man. And so there's nothing contradictory about that unless you've already decided that there is. So just like we've already said, this statement just isn't true. And notice the implication of what they're saying. And so it's like they've searched the entire universe through all of time and all of space and, even beyond that. And there isn't any God. All right, so all of us must be committed to philosophical materialism. There's nothing to be found anywhere that isn't just matter and energy. And how could anyone possibly get to that point? How could anyone possibly know that that's true? Or even believe that they know that that's true? All right, this is an obvious faith position. All right, this is a decision to believe something that cannot be verified. All right, there just isn't any data to support this claim. And so we can, verify that gravity exists. All right, we can measure it, we can observe it, we can measure electricity, we can demonstrate that it exists. And so where's the verification for philosophical materialism that would justify lumping it in with gravity and electricity? All right, there just isn't any. It can't be verified at all. And the truth is that for these authors, for all these authors know, they could someday drop dead, and the very next moment, they could be standing face to face with God. All right. There's no way at all for them to be sure that that isn't going to happen. But if you have this prior commitment to believe in materialism, then a miracle of any kind could never happen. People who believe in miracles are like superstitious, and they're foolish, and they're uneducated. And to the same materialist, morality also doesn't exist, right? Not in any objective sense. You know, you can make up morals if you want to, and you can subscribe to those morals, and you can act by those morals, but they're not binding or authoritative in any way. And these same people, you know, that would deny the existence of God also come to the conclusion that human beings don't actually have any real significance of their own. And so, you know, some of them claim that that isn't true, but it is true from their point of view. And so if a human being is nothing but random matter, then 175 pounds of dead flies in a bag has the exact same value that I do. All right, we're the same stuff. And so they might like think about that for a second and make the claim that the two things are different because the flies are dead and I'm alive. So that would mean that 175 pounds of live flies in a bag do in fact have the same value that I do. The chemical composition of that bag of flies, right? If you put it in a blender and compare it to the chemical makeup of me, if you put me in a blender, right? It's just about the same. So I probably have more calcium because I have bones, all right? But that's not a substantial difference, right? A little bit more calcium is not the measure of value. And so to a materialist, those two smoothies are the same. All right. And so, you know, the things that make up those smoothies are the same. And personally, I object, right? Like the notion itself, I object to it. And I also object to the fact that these guys that make this a priori commitment to philosophical materialism don't realize that they are men of faith. All right, they think that people that are into faith are separate from them, and that the people that are into faith are ignorant. And so these faith people are not knowledgeable enough to put their faith aside and be men of science like they are. All right, yet they've made this prior commitment that they are going to believe this certain position. And so materialists like to say that, you know, they can't prove the non-existence of God, so it's up to other people to prove his existence. And since we can't prove that God is there, then they are not men of faith, and we are, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. And by structuring the discourse this way, they guarantee that they will win the debate. Okay, no worldview can be proven. And yet in this particular argument, it's always the opponent of materialism that has to prove their case, because the materialist worldview is assumed to be true. All right, and so if you structure the debate that way, you're always going to win. But the truth is that they have chosen a position. They have believed that position, and there is no way to know if it's true or not, right? There's no privileged position that, you know, we're all supposed to just take for granted that it's true. And so, you know, actually, I can't figure out why a materialist would even bother to study the world. Why would any of it even matter? All right. So there is one question that does matter, though. It should matter to everyone, even a philosophical materialist, right? Here's the question. Might God exist? Is there even a possibility that God exists? It's an interesting question, you know, and it's an interesting question to present to people with this kind of worldview. And if they can find it within themselves to respond negatively, right, that it is not possible that God exists, then they've kind of shown their hand. How could they possibly ascertain that it is not possible for God to exist? All right, they've proven by saying that this is a position of faith that they've taken, not a position of science. But if they're honest enough to say that it is possible, right, then they've crossed the threshold into no longer being philosophical materialists. All right, if there might be a God, if that is even possible, then it just became the most important question in the universe. All right, that question dwarfs any other possible question that we could raise. Because if God does exist, then we're probably going to have to deal with him sooner or later. All right, because he would be the source of all things. He would be the key to understanding the universe and to understanding myself and all the other people on earth. Nothing could even come close to matching the importance of that question. And anybody who's willing to be honest, right, has to admit that it is possible that God exists. And if you're going to be that honest, right, then the next step would be to see if there's a way to make contact with God. All right? If God might exist, then you need to figure out whether there's a way to get in touch with him. And I would think that it would be worth a lengthy search and a fair amount of sacrifice and inquiry to try to discover if there might be a God and if there's a way to get into contact with him. So any honest materialist should be able to concede that if there's a God, that's a pretty big deal. All right, and it's really hard to come up with something that's more important than this as a thing that needs to be worked out. All right. So let's look at Jesus for a little bit as we continue to chop up the theology of miracles. And so, imagine that you're just some random first century Jewish guy. All right, and Jesus shows up. And he says that he's from God, and he actually claims to be the Son of God. He says that he's the fulfillment of all of your prophecies. He's the guy that you've been promised for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Guy claims to be the savior of the human race. He's the Messiah. And so would you believe him if he never performed any miracles? No. All right? They shouldn't have believed him if he couldn't do anything that they couldn't do. And neither should we. And so, imagine if some guy, let's just say it's Clay, all right, comes in here and he says that the thing that we need to believe about him is that he's the Son of God. All right? We need to not believe him unless he can quiet the storm, okay, and feed 5,000 people, or at least levitate a chair or something. All right, so if I grew up down the street from some guy or knew him from the village I grew up in, and he's walking around and he puts his hand on a person that has leprosy and the leprosy goes away, you would definitely start to think that this guy that you thought was just some guy maybe is more than that. All right, so if Clay touches you and you don't have COVID anymore, or the cancer goes away, we all need to rethink the way that we view Clay. Okay, maybe rethink how we view the entire universe. And so, I guess what I'm saying is that it is totally normal and to be expected that Jesus would perform miracles. Because if he didn't, nobody would have listened to him. Okay, the things that he was saying were inflammatory, and they seemed a little bit crazy, and they ran counter to the conventional wisdom of the time. And it was the miracles that kept the crowds coming back. And then they're forced to deal with what he was saying. The resurrection of Christ from the dead, right? It's like a first-class miracle right there. So that's a big one. I don't know what else you could possibly do to prove supernatural power. And I don't know what else could be any more difficult to accept that it actually happened. And according to Paul, if you don't believe in that, then we don't really have anything to talk about. If Christ did not raise from the dead, then all of Christianity is false. All of the New Testament authors are liars, including himself, Paul, right? Everything about Christianity goes away if Jesus isn't resurrected. Your faith is worthless. Your sins are not forgiven. You're wasting your time. You're pitiful. It says that of all men, you are most to be pitied. All right, so get used to it. All right, deal with it. As a Christian, we believe in supernatural things. And, you know, I just absolutely cringe when, as Christians, we're reading the Bible and we come to some miracle account and we explain it away with some bizarre but natural phenomenon, right? You're missing the point if you do that. And it is kind of normal to read a passage and go like, wow, that's a little bit far-fetched, man. All right, that's difficult to believe that that actually happened. But who's it far-fetched for? You know, it's far-fetched for a naturalist or a philosophical materialist. It's not far-fetched for God. All right, and as Christians, we've already brought God into the picture. That's what we're doing here. All right, and so, you know, really what we're dealing with is our presuppositions. It's our base assumptions that determine our reactions to these kinds of things that happen in the Bible. All right, so a couple more interesting questions here. Maybe you've asked yourself some of these questions. I have. So you've accepted, you know, that miracles are real and that they happen, and even that they still happen, right? Why don't they happen more often? Why isn't God doing more miraculous stuff all the time? Right? How come all these people are sick? How come we can't just walk up and, you know, lay some hands on people and fix stuff? All right. How about this one? These little miracles seem to be common, right? And big miracles really never seem to happen. You ever notice that? All right. Skeptical people notice that. You know, I pray to find my car keys and God miraculously shows me where they are, right? Maybe, I suppose. But, you know, the leg I lost in a car accident is still gone, and I've been praying about that for a long time. Right? It's not even starting to grow back yet. Right? So since these little miracles keep happening, but the big ones just don't very often, the take is that we are interpreting these things as miracles when actually it's just like stuff happening normally. And so, you know, one way to look at answering these questions is to imagine a situation where giant miracles are happening all over the place all of the time. All right, when anyone is sick, a Christian could just walk up and touch them and they'd be healed. God appears all the time and he like stops car accidents from happening and stuff. And so, like at that point, where would be the place for faith on our part? And so Hebrews says that faith is the assurance of things that are not seen. And so God could show up and like lead a parade down the street, healing everyone along the way. And tons of people would believe in God, but there would be no faith at all. And so this is the way that like God has chosen to roll. There's an element of faith that is required of us. And it would take that away if there were miracles happening all the time. And so, most of the world just hurtles along on like a cause and effect basis. And, God's not controlling all of the things that are happening. He's not like micromanaging everyone's safety. Things are just set up to work on the basis of some rules. And we just accept the rules. We have to accept the rules. And, when the disciple Thomas, who was a major skeptic, said that he wouldn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead until he could put his fingers in the holes that the Romans had poked in Jesus. Right? He's a little bit shocked when he's sitting there having lunch and Jesus Christ walks right through the wall and into the room. And Jesus says, "Hey, Thomas, here you go, pal. Stick your finger in there." All right. Thomas immediately knows who it is, and he falls to the ground. Right? My Lord, my God. He knows exactly who it is, and he believes. And Jesus says to him, "Now that you see, you believe. But blessed are those who do not see and believe anyway." Okay, Jesus is not going to go up to every single person and ask us to stick our finger in the holes. All right, so we're in this position where we have the opportunity to believe without having seen. We have to believe at least enough to call out and ask God to show himself to us. All right, he will answer that prayer. All right, but I think that's kind of why we don't see all these massive miracles happening all the time. All right, why do we see miracles? All right, the miracles that happen in the Bible. And so a lot of authors, both Christians and non-Christians, have been struck by the fact that the miracles that are described in the Bible are very, very different from the kind of craziness that we read about in mythology. All right, the miracles that we see in mythology are often like creepy, weird things that happen for no apparent reason. All right, princes get turned into frogs, stuff like that. But in the Bible, there seems to be a logic behind the miraculous things that happen. So there are clusters of miracles during periods of biblical history where God is introducing a major change in the direction of things. All right, so like when the ministry of Jesus starts, right, that is a new program being introduced. It's a new covenant, and it's accompanied by a ton of miracles. Happens in the book of Acts. Also, massive amounts of miracles in the book of Acts. And so in the Old Testament, it happens at the time of Moses. And so like at key points, God sends these clusters of the miraculous to reassure people that it's really him. All right. So a change in direction for your spirituality is a very dangerous thing unless your God shows up and lets you know that it really is from him. You see what I mean? Like you can't just change the direction of things without knowing for sure that it's God. And so at other times, we see a class of miracles that are there to protect the people of God. So the people are under attack and, God causes heavy hail to fall down on their enemies and drive them away. Or Peter's in jail and about to be killed and, God sends an angel to bust him out. God also uses miracles to validate key leaders and prophets, different points in history, like, an axe head floats up in the water and stuff like that. People are, caused to be able to heal the sick. All right, validating new leaders. At other times, the miracles themselves are making some kind of theological point. So this is especially true in the ministry of Jesus. The miracles of Jesus are really full of content. Sometimes they're expressing God's view of marginalized, unloved people. God loves the people that have been rejected by the world. And so the miracle that we just read about this morning is like this. Jesus reaches out and he touches a leper. All right, there's a statement there. All right, the guy says that, like if Jesus is willing, he could heal him. And Jesus says, I'm willing. And he gives the guy a hug or whatever, right? He grasps the guy. And what it's saying, right? What is the picture? What's the Bible? What's the message being communicated when Jesus touches this guy? All right. It's a picture of, that God is a God of love, and he doesn't come just to love rich people and beautiful people and popular people. He loves all people, including and especially the marginalized people. Sometimes the miracles show God's view of sin, and so this is what we're going to look at next week. All right, he's talking about forgiveness, and he uses miracles and healings to illustrate that. Miracles are sometimes there to show God's authority, right? Jesus calms the storm. People react by commenting on the authority that he must have to command the wind to go, right? You're in charge of a lot of things if the wind is under your authority, okay? All right, so miracles, of course, prove his own authenticity. So even Jesus said that if you're not going to believe in him because of who he is, then believe in him because of the things he can do. So how can you explain the miracles that Jesus can do if he's not who he says he is? The people are like, I don't know how to explain it, so we're going to kill you. All right, that's pretty much where they landed. So miracles are used to illustrate the nature of true faith. And so Jesus will sometimes hold back on a miracle and have a dialogue on the nature of true faith. And then he uses the miracle to illustrate what he was just saying. That happens. Miracles also demonstrate Jesus' superiority over the demonic. All right, so this is a time when people were perfectly clear that Satan and demons were real, and the miracles of Jesus demonstrate that he's more powerful than his enemy. All right, so after all that, we read on in Matthew 8. Jesus says to the leper who is now healed, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." All right, so we see this a lot in the early part of the ministry of Jesus. People kept saying that he was the Messiah, and he would tell them not to tell anybody. All right, so why is he keeping it undercover? And so a couple of times he tells us the reason. He says that his hour hasn't yet come. All right, so he knew that if it came to light that he was saying that he was the promised Messiah, then they would kill him. All right, and even though he never doubted that he would be killed at some point, he needed a certain amount of time to get his teaching done before that happened. And later, when he's coming into Jerusalem, for the triumphal entry, the disciples say that he should shut the people up because they're calling him the Messiah. And the disciples thought that they might get Jesus killed. All right, and at that point, Jesus says back to them, "I will not shut them up. And if they were quiet, then the rocks would cry it out." All right, and that was because his hour had come. All right, and so the next thing that we see here is that he sends this leper to see the priests. So this is from Leviticus 14, where it says that if a leper gets healed, he has to go and demonstrate to the priests that he's clean. There's an offering involved, some other stuff, and so this was partly to comply with the law, but like he says, it's also a testimony to these priests. And so we have a tendency to view the priests in the New Testament as the bad guys. all right, that were against Jesus. But really, that was mainly the high priests. And so in the book of Acts, we read that many of the regular priests became believers. And possibly that was because of things like this, all right, where Jesus sent testimony to them of the power of God, right, and the truth of the miracles that he was doing. All right, so this is another one. This is verses 5 through 13. It says, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed and in terrible suffering. So a centurion is a Roman commander of 100 men. This guy is not Jewish, all right? The version that I have up here is the NIV. It translates this as my servant. Some versions say my son. And so the word literally translates as my boy. All right, they have a different word for son, so it could be his son. I'm inclined to go with this translation here where it says it's his servant. I'll show you why in just a minute. Jesus says, I will go and I will heal him. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. And so he uses the same term here at the end for my servant. All right, that's why I think that it's not his son, because he's obviously talking about his servant here at the end. When Jesus heard this, he was astonished and said to those following him, I tell you the truth, I've not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. All right, and Jesus is saying that this is like pitiful, that this is true. If anyone should know and recognize the Messiah, it should be the Jewish people, okay, that have all of the scriptures and stuff. This guy's a Roman and he's a Gentile. And Jesus describes this guy's posture as faith. All right, and I got 3 reasons why he would characterize it that way. And so it's partly this guy's confidence in the power of God. He has no doubt in God's ability to heal this guy. And so it's important that this guy recognizes that it has to be in accordance with God's will. There's a difference between when people say something like, if you are willing, then you can heal me, and the position that this is all just magic. All right, magic would be where you just believe hard enough and you imagine in your mind clearly enough and it just comes true. Okay, so that's like the New Age version of faith, where all the trying hard comes from me. That's not biblical faith at all. Biblical faith has to do with what God wants, right? It has to believe you have to want what God wants to be the case. And so if God wants this person healed, then I know that he has the power to do it. And so the last thing is that this centurion recognizes that the will of God and the power of God would be expressed through his word. All right, so he tells Jesus to just give the word, and then he would know that his servant would be healed. He knows how all that works because he himself is a man that is in authority and also a man that is under authority. And so the centurion just has to speak a word, and he's sure that what he says will get accomplished. And so it works the same way with Jesus. And so God is working his will using his power through his word. And that is exactly what biblical faith anticipates. Then Jesus said to the centurion, go, it will be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed that very hour. So I don't really know if this is the same story that's recorded in the book of John, chapter 4. It's a little bit hard to say. But what's the significance of this story of healing in terms of the narrative of Matthew, right? Like, why is he bringing this up? All right, so in the next couple of verses, Jesus says, I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So according to Jesus, it was significant that you have this Gentile here with more faith than the Jewish people. All right, and at this time, Rabbinic Judaism was becoming an increasingly ethnic religion. The Jews kind of felt like they were like in there with God, no matter what. Didn't really matter if they believed anything or not. They're Jewish, so they had it going on. So they were hugely wrong about that, and that's what Jesus is saying here. And so this miracle here would be an example where Jesus uses his authority to declare that God is not all into that race religion stuff. Okay, God's not a respecter of persons. There isn't any partiality with God. And so then Matthew includes a related miracle in verses 14 and 15. Where are we? Okay, so it says, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. So this time, it's a woman, all right? The unimportant gender, especially in that day. I mean, just in that day. Seriously, though, like in that time, women were essentially possessions. All right, they were chattel. Okay, they just didn't have that high a view of women. So Jesus heals a woman. And then on one last note, in verse 16, we read that when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with the word and healed all the sick. So that's an interesting verse. It's easy to miss what it's saying, all right? So you can see that the Bible knows the difference between demon possession and illness. And so some of these people were demon-possessed, and in those he cast out the spirit. Others were sick, and he healed those. So that's very unusual in ancient literature. And so most of them thought that all illnesses were caused by demons. They didn't have this other category. All right, and so here in the Word of God, they're distinct. All right, let's pack this all together. We have 4 miraculous healings, one right after another. And so the first one is a leper. He's outcast from society. This is a guy that people would stay hundreds of yards away from. They would shout, curse, throw rocks at him if he tried to come anywhere near him. The second one's a Gentile. Person that's not part of the chosen race. Jewish people routinely called Gentiles dogs, even up through the time of the New Testament. They had a very low view of them. They didn't really believe that it was okay to even talk or hang out with Gentiles. They certainly didn't believe it was okay to enter the house of a Gentile. That's probably why when Jesus offered to go to the guy's house, the guy declined. All right, he knew that it would be considered totally uncool of Jesus to do that. You know, a slave gets healed. The lowest of the low. No one more marginalized in any society than a slave. Lastly, a woman. All right, the unimportant sex. And so ask yourself if this is a coincidence. All right, these 4 healings. I doubt it. Remember who the author of this book is. Matthew's a tax collector. He's, one of the top rejected classes of his culture. And Jesus kind of pushes him right through and into direct discipleship with him. So Matthew knew the attitude of Jesus towards marginalized people. And that's what Matthew taught. It's what he's teaching in this passage. All right. And it's not just that they were unimportant. It's also that God loved them. All right. That's why he grasps the leper. Jesus is reaching out to these people. He's showing that he's real and that he's the one that they've been waiting for. And, like the lesson for us should be clear. All right. He loves you. And he also loves the people that you reject. All right. So it's possible that you're sitting here right now because God has brought you into this place because he wants you to know that. All right. So Jesus used all this miraculous power to authenticate himself. He exercised this power in these situations to show his love for the people who were unloved. And the power that he showed was more than sufficient for even, super severe problems. And so problems don't really get much worse than leprosy. All right. So leprosy, paralysis, whatever, his power could handle the problem. He was fully adequate to rescue anyone at all. And I wonder if that idea has any application in your life right now. So the Bible is teaching that he wants to express his love to you, for you, and to you. It says here in chapter 11, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light." All right, that's an awesome passage. And Jesus is basically saying that he's not going to call you to be some do-gooder. He's done all the work. He's paid the price. But if you've got some burden and you want some rest, you need to go to him. All right, this is an open invitation to every one of us to enter into a personal relationship with God through Jesus. So you should consider that. All right, maybe you should do that this morning in your own heart. Go to God as weary and tired of being alone, or fed up with feeling like something's missing in your life, or that you're not experiencing what you should be in life. It's likely that what you're experiencing is that you don't have God in your life. You may have spent countless Sunday mornings in church, but you never decided to really share your life with God. All right, submit to his authority. So you should think about doing that, now. All right, next week, we're going to talk about what it means to practice faith in our daily lives as we finish chapter 8. So it's a super interesting passage, but that's all I got for this morning.